research suggests that a lot of young men are feeling lonely. And I was actually just having this conversation with someone literally 30 minutes ago in regard to a lot of men not having friends. The conversation 30 minutes ago didn't have a whole lot of context. I think it was more, well, it had some context. The context was partially this concept of living in a virtual world. There's not a whole lot of emotion attached to that, at least not in the same way as we may have grown accustomed to throughout our younger years of life. In the beginning of social media and et cetera was exciting. But once the excitement wears off, now you're looking for something, or you may be looking for something substantiated. And that substance is not there. At least not in the way that you're looking for it, because the way that you're looking for it is informed by your reference point. And your reference point was what life was like prior to social media. And being that you haven't, or you may not have cultivated or continued to cultivate those friendships or life outside of social media, there's going to be a void there as far as substance is concerned. And so, although you may have a lot of people that you speak with, you have a lot of people that you interact with, you don't necessarily feel like you have a lot of friends. And when you speak to the older generation, which is oftentimes what happens when we're seeking wise counsel, their definition of a friend is very different from the experience that a lot of people are having today. Supposedly, a lot of men don't have friendships, and the research supports that, like solid friendships. It's one thing to know a lot of people, but to really have friendships, I was actually just thinking about that. I oftentimes speak about this concept of having universal friends, but I'm wondering if there is a friend outside of a universal friend. And my answer to that is yes, but where on a spectrum do they fall? For example, you have a universal friend, you can call them for whatever you're going through in life. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, whatever the circumstance is, you can reach out to this person and they will be of some type of assistance to you, or at least they would care to be. Then you have friends or people in your life that you can't do that with, at least not with every day. If you want to go to the club and turn up, you can call them. But just about anything else, not really. If you have an issue that needs to be resolved, you can call them, but not really for anything else. And etc. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking about, if you have someone that you can just turn up with, and then you have someone that's not really interested in turning up with you, but they're interested in your safety. So if your safety is in jeopardy, you can call them, and they will help you. Out of these two people, which one of these people would you most likely consider your friend? Yes, you have a universal friend. You can call them for everything. Granted, you can say that person is a solid friend, because they pretty much check off all boxes, at least most. But for these two people that don't really check off any other box other than the one that they check off, what real value do they bring to your life? For example, if I want to call you when I turn up, that's great, but how often am I going to the club? And for how long is that going to be relevant? And how necessary is that? As opposed to this person that's really focused on your physical health. So they show up in dire moments, like when you're in dire need, whereas this person shows up when everything is pretty much cool. Which one of these people would you consider more of a friend? So that's an interesting concept that I'm pondering about. And I'm sure it's different for different people, but I'm interested in the rationale that people have in regard to it. So looking forward to those types of conversations.
You mentioned virtual friendships. We also often talk about how people can't make a distinction between, your brain can't make the distinction between what's real in real life and reality and what's is real and virtual reality.
Your brain can make the distinction between what's virtual and what's real. Your brain doesn't necessarily make the distinction between your imagination and what's real. Your imagination it lives within you, just like your experiences do. If you have a physical experience with someone, that experience lives within you. The experience virtually also lives within you. But there's a setup that makes the virtual experience possible that's not required in the real life physical experience. For example, I don't even take out my phone, log in, go to a social media app, go to your page, go to your DM section and write you a message if I'm interacting with you in person. So that process, having to go throughout that medium, tells your brain that this is virtual. Whereas if I'm just imagining something, that process doesn't exist. So in that way, your brain doesn't make a difference.
Do you think that's what makes the distinction between what makes it fulfilling and what's not?
So I think what makes it essential?
It being virtual.
No, because there are people who don't necessarily care to have a digital presence and still don't necessarily have friends. There's people who are around people physically often, but they still don't feel like they have friends. They have a lot of people that they interact with, but don't necessarily have friends. And vice versa. There are people who are rarely around any people, but they feel like they have a lot of friends. A lot is relative as well. Some people feel like a lot is 100. Some people feel like a lot is 3. To some extent, it does depend on the person.
What do you think, or like what are the effects of loneliness? Socially and mentally and health wise?
The effects of loneliness socially would essentially mean that you lack social. Well, what leads to loneliness is essentially not having a social life in a lot of instances, but not every instance. Because a person doesn't necessarily have to be alone to feel lonely. You could be in a room full of people and feel lonely. You could be sharing a physical space with your lover and feel lonely. A lot of people feel lonely in their romantic relationships. So that's more in regard to a feeling that you get from the people around you. Do you actually feel a connection with the people, or do you only feel like you're around each other? Are you connected or just around each other? Some people are just around each other. They don't really have any connection. They don't really have any chemistry. There's really no value that the person is really adding to the other person. They're just sharing a space. They're just in close proximity to one another. That's not being connected. That's just being around someone. For example, you see a couple walk into the party. Are they together or are they around each other? Some people walk in and you can see the love. You can feel it between them. And sometimes you can't. It's almost as if they're not in a relationship. If they didn't tell you that they were in a relationship, you wouldn't see it. You still don't see it. Even after they tell you. You don't see any chemistry. You just respect the labels that they put on them, but you don't actually see it. You don't actually feel it. Not to say that everyone who's experiencing that is lonely. I'm saying that to say that if you don't have the connection between you and the person that you're with, or you and the people that you're around, chances are that's going to lend itself well to you being lonely or feeling lonely when you're around those people. So that's the social element. As far as the effects that it can have on your health, that's different for different people. Sometimes it almost has the same, or seemingly has the same effect as like depression. That depends on the person. Sometimes it's the same effect as someone who's quote unquote stressed. Some people, for example, when they get stressed, they experience psoriasis or skin irritations, like eczema, temporary eczema, and that's how it shows up. Some people lose their appetite. Some people gain an appetite. Some people can't sleep. Some people, their hair starts falling out. It depends on the person. The emotion itself, or the feeling itself. The emotion is probably sadness. The feeling is loneliness. Lacking community.
You know what I find very interesting is that on some of these podcasts, those red pill podcasts, they really blame women for men's loneliness because of their high standards. That men are lonely.
Men are lonely because of women's high standards.
Like, oh yeah, y'all not paying no attention to anyone under 6 feet who's making under 6 figures. Whoop-de-whoop.
3 6s. 6 feet, 6 figures, 6 pack.
Mm-hmm. But I think, yeah, sure, woman can accompany you, and the right woman might really add to your life. But I feel like loneliness, like some chick is not gonna fix that for you. So I think it's a matter of what men do amongst each other. It's not a matter of men and women necessarily.
It's not really a matter of men or women. It's more a matter of men and because a man being lonely is not, or a man not having friends. You don't only have to have male friends. And we're speaking in context of friendships, not necessarily in context of romance. Yes, you can have both. In context of friendship alone is it's both men and women. And loneliness exists in context as well. You can be very fulfilled in your romantic relationship and not feel lonely there. But outside of that, you feel very lonely. Or vice versa. Your friendships, your platonic friendships may be very fulfilling, but your romantic relationship is very lonely. And it also depends on where you look for friendship or where you look for camaraderie. Because in your personal life, you can have a romantic relationship and you can have friends that are amazing. But in your professional life, you feel very alone. You feel very lonely. So there's context to loneliness. And it's not just based on men or women. It's based on men and women.